ran a lot of coverage about the Iraq war on the front page of the New York Times, which turned out to be disastrously wrong. And yet she was still seen as a kind of Joan of Arc figure because she went to jail to protect her sources. Well, we covered that story exhaustively, like every day. And we were instrumental, together with other outlets, in turning around the public perception of how she was seen. We, for example, right now, continue to cover what's happening in Iraq. There's a lot of violence still in Iraq, while a lot of the mainstream media are sort of relegating it to page 827, below the fold. We very often will put it at the top of our homepage, therefore reminding people that Iraq is by no means a solved problem.
So how do you decide what stories to put up? What's different in what you're doing versus what, say, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or anyone else would do?
Well, what we're doing basically is divided into three parts. One is we aggregate news from every source around the world, whatever we consider the most interesting stories. And very often we will put a story at the top that is, as we said earlier, not prominently displayed in newspapers. For example, we have been arguing for some time now that what's happening with the banks is not going to work. So whenever someone like Alan Greenspan came out in favor of nationalizing the banks, or Senator Lindsey Graham, who's a right-wing Republican, said we cannot take that option off the table, we will put it at the top to help accelerate the shift away from the assumption that somehow you can continue throwing money at the banks but keeping them under the current management. So because of the certain beliefs that we have, certain assumptions we make, we will put at the top of the page whatever the news is that advances those assumptions. But it has to be the news and it has to be the facts.
Who decides that? Is this you just getting up in the morning and saying, I'm tired of these the money being thrown at these greedy bankers and we shall have this ended tomorrow?
It's actually looking at the facts. You know, even though obviously blogging is primarily about opinion, we see ourselves as considering facts absolutely sacred. So if you look at the facts right now, you can see that what's happening is not working. It's not, you don't have to have a PhD in economics to be able to see that. I just actually wrote about the fact that so often we hide behind complexity. We talk as though everything is so difficult to know. But in fact, certain things are very clear. Common sense prevails. So we try to kind of portray that common sense. And if you take, as an example, the fact that the CEO of Bank of America is going to court to prevent the public from knowing who Bank of America has given bonuses to, who Merrill Lynch has given bonuses to. I mean, that is obviously wrong. It's not something that is disputable. And yet we're allowing it to continue. So there is still no oversight.
So you're pressing for something like that.
We're pressing that.
Let's talk about the idea of change and transparency. Radical transparency is critically important in the media now. The idea of, I publish memos constantly, memos. I don't write about, a lot of people were worried about the gating of media. I just publish and let people decide. How do you look at, that's what I look at transparency. You let anybody decide what they want to do. And the idea, one of the only good quotes from a network executive that I ever heard was, the consumer has now taken control of the media and it doesn't show any interest in giving it back. In our country, that's absolutely the case. They're controlling music, they're controlling news, how they consume news. What are the important things, you know, here are these people here wanting to know about what tools you use. What's critically important to delivering what you're doing?
Well, obviously, what's critically important is, first of all, to provide a platform to many interesting voices. Some of them are older people who may not even have a computer. Like one of the first people I invited to blog was the historian Arthur Schlesinger, who would fax me his blogs. So it doesn't matter how it gets online, as long as people who have interesting things to say can do it in an easy way. We have 3,000 bloggers with their own password, and we get thousands of submissions that we choose among. So that's one of the things, kind of a platform for interesting views, not just on politics, but
you're
on
expanding,
everything,
you're
because
expanding.
we've launched many other verticals. So half our traffic now does not come from politics.
Right.
It comes from living, from entertainment, from media, from a green section, from Chicago, which is our first local section. So that's important too. You know, our goal is not just to talk to people who agree with us politically, but to expand the universe of users. Also, technology, of course, is critical. We keep coming up with new technological tools to engage our users. For example, we launched something called Fundraise. So you can find out immediately what anybody has contributed to political candidates.
Right.
By putting in a name, a zip code. So
this was information that was available but hard to get to.
Yes, exactly. That's information that's in the public domain, but we make it easily searchable and available to our users.
That had a lot of repercussions in California during Proposition 8, which was the anti-gay marriage proposition, because you could find out who gave to it, and it caused several people to have to resign jobs in Los Angeles and things like that, which was who had been among the gay community had given to Proposition 8, and they were sort of tossed right out immediately. It was an interesting phenomenon.
Another thing we did with technology is we created what we're calling big news pages. So for example, within literally a couple of hours after Sarah Palin was chosen as the Republican VP nominee, we had a Sarah Palin big news page, which means once you have 25 items, news or blogs, you can have a Sarah Palin page. So you can go there and have everything about her. Right now, for example, we could, within a couple of hours, have a page on this Congress. So you could go there and have everybody's speeches, comments about it. So immediately you can swamp a subject in a way that really works online.
So how important is the consumer voice versus editorial? Obviously you have an editorial opinion, you have editors there at the Huffington Post deciding what should be aggregated, what should be featured, what pictures, same thing as a newspaper would do. How important versus the user-generated versus the editorial, the sort of top-down thing that's been used by newspapers and media forever, versus sort of bottom-up user-generated?
Bottom-up is incredibly important, but we are making absolutely sure that a civil environment prevails. So for example, our comments are entirely pre-moderated on the blog, and half pre-moderated, half post-moderated, depending on the sensitivity of the story in the news. Now that has required a tremendous investment for us in resources and people. We have like almost 30 comment moderators working 24/7 so that comments can appear in real time. But we felt it was very important because one of the problems of the internet is trolls, as we call them.
Trolls.
You know, people basically hiding behind anonymity and making vile comments, which immediately creates an atmosphere that makes it very hard to have a civil debate and a civil conversation. So from the beginning, we wanted to avoid that because bottom line, Cara, we believe that you can take the best of traditional journalism, you know, fairness, a respect for facts, accuracy, and bring it together with the best of new media, which is transparency, immediacy, intimacy. And that's the future. And that can come from